but now people were being diagnosed with what they called black lung, which we know now is cancer, and they were dying from it, and people didn't really understand what black lung was, but they knew, because they would call it black lung because then when people would die, they'd do an autopsy and they'd open them up and their lungs were black. So, but it was from the cancer, but they just called it black lung, and they knew it was from the pollution, but they didn't know what the connection was. So we won't find that out, you know, for at least a couple more generations, that the pollution and the carcinogens and everything in the pollution were actually causing lung cancer, throat cancer, different kinds of cancer. It was killing people. So that was another thing that was just kind of like, what's happening to our world? So first of all, you have people who are having a loss of identity because their whole identity is being replaced by a machine. You have their environment being taken over by these giant factories and pollution and things that just never really existed before the Industrial Revolution. And it really had a huge impact on some people's identities, just starting to think like, why was I born right now? You know, why now? Why wasn't I born? There's a great, it's lighthearted, but I love the idea of it. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Midnight in Paris.
Yeah, I love that movie.
So it's a Woody Allen film, and it's called Midnight in Paris, but it's this idea that everybody believes that the generation before them was better, more ideal and better. So the main character is a modern guy, but he believes that, you know, the roaring 20s, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway and all these guys who lived in Paris, like that was the best time to be in Paris. So he manages somehow to go back in time, and he's in this time period. But then he meets a woman in that time period who thinks that Belle Epoque, which is the previous 100 years before, she thinks that the 1920s are horrible, and she wants to go back to Belle Epoque because she thinks that that was the most glorious time in Parisian history. So it's that feeling, and so, but a lot of people are starting to experience this kind of for the first time, because not only that, along comes a book. So keep all of this in mind, and then along comes a book. This book is published in 1859, so right in the middle of all of this. Also keep in mind then, in the US, the Civil War is also going on. World War I is just around the corner, but tensions are already starting. But what's going on in 1859? What book gets published in 1859 that just basically disrupts the world? Truly disrupts the world. What's that? What did you say?
War and Peace.
Oh, not War and Peace. Think of a book that could literally disrupt the world. No, that was way before, but no comment, but that was way before.
Origin of
Charles
Yeah,
Darwin.
I thought religion. Or science.
Yeah, I really did thought religion.
The Origin of Species is published by Charles Darwin. This literally disrupts the world. First of all, the Catholic Church denounces Darwin as a heretic. Nothing new, the Catholic Church just denounced. I mean, Galileo, Michelangelo, like Newton, the list goes on. Basically, anybody who challenged any kind of church doctrine was labeled a heretic. Darwin also had the honor of being called a heretic for very obvious reasons. So everybody's kind of secure in their religious beliefs and thinking that, you know, they're taking the Bible at its word. People believed really in what happened, and you might, and I'm not going to get into intelligent design, or I'm not getting into any of that kind of debate, but just keep in mind that along comes this guy. So in the middle of people already starting to have problems with their identity and questioning their place in the world, and then along comes a guy that says, oh, and by the way, we're evolved from apes. Can you imagine?
No.
You can't, actually. You can't really imagine what that was like. And he had so much scientific proof that, and there were enough people that believed what he was saying, enough to where the Catholic Church declared him a heretic. And of course tried to prevent the origin of species from being published in very Catholic parts of the world, to much success in the beginning, actually. But eventually, some people were having to face a very hard truth that what if this guy's right? The only thing that I can compare this to for us is, and I know this is going to seem crazy, but it's actually not that crazy if you think about it. So, do you guys know who the Raelians are? Have you ever heard of the Raelians?
It's a book, right?
No, it's a group of people. The Raelians are a group of people, and they're sometimes, well, no, I'm not going to say that, but the Raelians, I'll just tell you their basic beliefs. The Raelians are a group of people who believe that we are descended from alien DNA.
Oh.
That, yeah, well, they believe like that in part, that at some point in history when an asteroid hit the Earth, and there's some kind of indication of maybe a little bit of this, but that when an asteroid hit the Earth, it brought foreign organisms to the Earth, and those foreign organisms were basically, or alien organisms, is what eventually, like, sprouted human beings. But they still believe that the progenitors of this, like the people who spawned that biological organism, is still out there somewhere, and that when we die, we basically go back to the home planet. So that's what they believe. And they believe this. So they believe that basically we're all just like aliens waiting to just go home to the mother planet sort of thing. And some people think that's absurd. Like, that's absolutely crazy. Some people think that's absolutely crazy, especially people who really hold on to their religious beliefs and think that, forget it. But imagine tomorrow the headlines read, Raelians proven correct.
I would want to go back to my alien planet.
Well, what would you do?
And leave us the proof.
But I mean, realistically, we can theoretically think about it, because that's all we can do is really theoretically think about it. But imagine somebody actually shows you scientific proof that, yep, there's a planet up there that we're actually all from, and that's where we're going to go, and we're all actually just aliens. For the people who especially have very, very strong religious beliefs and things like that, forget it. I mean, that's going to destroy them. Some people place their whole identity within their religious beliefs and things like that. So if you come along and tell somebody that, nope, none of it's true, we are all actually just aliens, that would, to me, like, that would do a huge psychological number on me, to really try to begin to wrap my head around that, the reality of that. If you really kind of started to think about, like, really let your head go into that domain, like, that's a pretty powerful thing to start to kind of wrap your head around. But that's basically what Charles Darwin did in 1859 to people who had for millennia believed in a very strong religious doctrine. Bless you. And that all of a sudden here comes a guy saying that, nope, in fact, we're kind of monkeys. And everybody's just like, this guy's crazy. So again, this is also having an impact on people's identity. Everybody knows, certainly by Kate Chopin's time, she knows about Darwin. People are reading Darwin, like the kind of intelligentsia, as they are called, like are reading Darwin, et cetera, et cetera. The last thing that I want to talk about that was going on at this time is sorry. Seneca Falls Convention, which actually takes place in 1848. So actually before Chopin is born, it takes place. But Chopin grew up with very strong women in her family. Very, I don't want to say liberal or progressive, but just women who were more about taking their own power back or trying to exert some kind of, their own power. And by power, I don't mean dominance. People sometimes, equal power with dominance. I don't mean dominance, but I mean just taking back their own wills rather than just being subject to other people's